The desert wind howled like a wounded animal, whipping sand across the cracked asphalt of Route 66's forgotten stretch. It was just past midnight when the headlights of a battered pickup truck pierced the darkness, illuminating a nightmare no one should witness. A young girl, no older than 10, stood trembling on the roadside, her nightgown torn and dirt-streaked, clutching a stuffed bear as if it were her only anchor. Tears carved clean paths through the grime on her cheeks, and her sobs cut sharper than the chill night air. Behind her, the truck's taillights flickered erratically. Its driver, a hulking figure with a sneer that spoke of too many unchecked tempers, yanked open the door, bellowing threats that echoed into the void. "Get back in here, you little brat! You think running fixes anything?" The girl's fear was palpable, a raw wound exposed under the moon's indifferent gaze, her small frame shrinking as he advanced. From the horizon, a low rumble grew, not thunder, but the thunder of engines, Harleys breathing fire and freedom. A lone biker crested the rise, his silhouette cutting a jagged line against the starry sky. He was Ethan Hale, a man forged in the fires of forgotten wars and personal ghosts, his leather vest scarred from battles no one else remembered. At 45, Ethan's face was a map of lines etched by loss. A brother gone too soon in a desert overseas, a marriage shattered by the weight of unspoken promises. He rode with the Iron Vow crew, a brotherhood bound not by blood, but by oaths sworn over flickering campfires, promises to stand for the broken when the world turned its back. Ethan feared the skies, heights that stole his control, but on the ground he was unyielding. Spotting the scene, he gunned the throttle, his bike roaring like a guardian beast as he skidded to a halt between the girl and her tormentor. The driver spun, fists clenched, eyes narrowing at the intruder. "Mind your own road, biker trash," he snarled, stepping forward with the arrogance of a man used to winning without consequence. Ethan dismounted slowly, his boots crunching gravel, the chain on his wallet jingling like a warning bell. He didn't reach for the knife tucked in his boot or the pistol holstered under his jacket. Violence was a last resort for men like him, a betrayal of the code that had kept him alive. Instead, he locked eyes with the girl, his voice steady as desert stone. "Hey, kid, you okay? What's your name?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Lila," her voice breaking like fragile glass. The driver lunged, but Ethan was faster, sidestepping and grabbing the man's arm in a grip honed by years of hauling freight and holding lines in the sand. "Walk away," Ethan said, low and final. "This ends now." What happened next would bind them in ways neither could foresee. A promise whispered in the pre-dawn light that would drag Ethan from his safe world of chrome and open roads into the uncharted terror of the skies. The driver backed off, muttering curses, but the damage was done. Lila's eyes held a plea that pierced Ethan's armored heart. He knelt, offering his bandana to wipe her face. "You're safe now, I promise." That word, promise, hung heavy, echoing the vow he'd made to his fallen brother. Protect the innocent, no matter the cost. As sirens wailed in the distance, Ethan called his crew, and by sunrise, 20 riders encircled the scene, a wall of leather and loyalty. They ensured Lila reached her frantic mother at a roadside diner, the air thick with the scent of coffee and exhaust. But in the quiet aftermath, as Lila hugged him fiercely, Ethan felt the weight settle. Her family was scattered, her father lost to some vague illness far away, and now, whispers of custody battles laced with corruption threatened to tear her from safety. "Will you come if I need you?" she asked, her small hand in his. He nodded, sealing it without thought. Always. Weeks blurred into months, the incident fading into Ethan's routine of long hauls and crew meets under neon-lit bars. The Iron Vow gathered in their desert compound, a sprawl of trailers and garages where the air smelled of oil and sagebrush. Ethan led rides for charity, mended bikes for veterans, lived by the creed that honor wasn't loud, but enduring. Yet the promise nagged, a quiet storm. Then, one rain-lashed evening, his phone buzzed on the scarred wooden table of his trailer. The screen glowed with an unknown number, but the voice on the other end shattered the calm. "Mr. Hale, it's Lila's mom, Sarah. She's gone missing. They say it's a mix-up with the courts, but I know it's more. Corrupt folks pulling strings. She's being taken to a facility out east by plane. I can't afford to fight it alone." Sarah's words trembled, laced with desperation. Ethan gripped the phone. Thunder rumbling outside like an omen. East meant airports, meant surrendering to the metal cage of a fuselage. The one fear that had kept him grounded since a chopper crash in his army days left him with nightmares of falling forever. He paced the trailer, the floorboards creaking under his boots, the scent of stale coffee mingling with his unease. Flying wasn't just heights. It was vulnerability, a loss of the wind in his face, the control of the throttle. But Lila's face flashed, those wide eyes trusting him in the desert night. The crew gathered as he explained, faces shadowed in the lamplight. "Brother, you don't have to," said Marcus, his old war buddy and vice of the vow, clapping a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "We'll find another way." But Ethan shook his head, the decision crystallizing like frost on his bike's tank. A promise is a promise. She's family now. By dawn, he'd booked the ticket, his stomach twisting as he stared at the confirmation. The crew saw him off at the small regional airport, engines idling in a farewell roar that drowned his doubts. "Ride safe up there," Marcus called, half joking. Ethan forced a grin, but inside, terror clawed. Boarding was a blur of sterile lights and echoing announcements, the plane's hum vibrating through his bones like an accusation. He claimed a window seat, knuckles white on the armrests, staring at the tarmac as if it might vanish. The cabin filled with strangers, business types tapping screens, a family with laughing kids, while Ethan sweated through his jacket, the recycled air tasting of regret. Takeoff was agony. The ground fell away and with it his anchors. Turbulence jolted him mid-flight, each dip a reminder of that long-ago crash, ghosts whispering of failure. He closed his eyes, breathing deep, clinging to Lila's promise like a lifeline. Hours stretched, the pilot's voice crackling over the intercom with routine updates until something shifted. A shadow fell across his row, and Ethan looked up to see the captain, tall, silver-haired, with a face etched by winds of his own, standing there, holding a small, weathered envelope. "Mr. Hale," the pilot said, his tone warm but grave, eyes meeting Ethan's with an intensity that cut through the fear. "I was asked to deliver this, from the ground crew back home." Ethan's hands shook as he took it, the paper soft from travel. Inside was a photo, Lila, safe for now but pleading in her expression, and a note from Sarah, but it was the pilot's next words that undid him. "I knew your brother back in the service. He saved my wingman once, pulled him from a wreck under fire, said if I ever crossed paths with you, to tell you, the skies aren't for fearing, they're for keeping promises." The captain's voice cracked, and Ethan felt the dam break, tears blurring the cabin lights. In that moment, mid-flight over endless clouds, the terror melted into something profound, a bridge between earthbound loyalty and the vast unknown, pulling him toward the fight that would test every vow he'd ever made. The plane dipped through a layer of wispy clouds, the engine's steady drone, now a reluctant companion to Ethan's racing thoughts. He clutched the envelope tighter, the pilot's words replaying like a loop of old film reel, his brother's name spoken aloud after years buried in the silence of memory. Tears dried on his cheeks, leaving salt tracks that itched under the cabin's dry air. But the fear that had gripped him at takeoff had loosened its hold, replaced by a fierce resolve. The captain had returned to the cockpit with a nod that felt like passing a torch, leaving Ethan to stare out the window at the patchwork of earth below. Rivers snaking like veins, cities glowing like distant campfires. For the first time since buckling in, he felt the sky not as an enemy, but as a vast road leading him forward. Descent brought the familiar jolt of reality. The landing gear whined against the runway, tires screeching as the jet taxied to the gate under the harsh floodlights of Eastern Regional Airport. Ethan unbuckled with trembling hands, the scent of jet fuel seeping through the vents, mingling with his own sweat-soaked leather. He shouldered his duffel, packed light with a change of clothes, his iron vow patch sewn defiantly on the strap, and shuffled into the aisle, avoiding the curious glances of passengers who had noticed his quiet breakdown. The terminal was a sterile maze of echoing footsteps and fluorescent buzz, but to Ethan, it hummed with urgency. Sarah had texted coordinates, a nondescript government building on the city's outskirts, the kind of place where promises went to die under layers of red tape and shadowed deals. Outside, the night air hit him like a slap, humid and thick, carrying the tang of rain-soaked concrete and distant traffic. No bike waited. Instead, he hailed a cab, the driver's radio crackling with static-laced news about local scandals, whispers of officials bending rules for favors. Ethan leaned back, the vinyl seat sticking to his jacket, and dialed Marcus. "Landed in one piece," he said, voice rough from disuse. "Feels like I've crossed into enemy territory." Marcus's laugh rumbled through the speaker, warm as engine heat. "You flew, brother. That's victory enough. Crew's mobilizing. 20 of us gearing up to ride out if you give the word. What's the play?" Ethan glanced at the passing neon signs, blurred by speed. "Recon first. This place reeks of the kind of rot we swore to burn out. Keep lines open." Hanging up, he felt the weight of the vow's loyalty anchor him, a chosen family stretching across miles like an invisible chain. The cab pulled up to the facility as dawn painted the sky in bruised purples, the building squatting behind chain-link fences topped with razor wire. A concrete fortress masquerading as a care center. Signs proclaimed it the Harmony Relocation Institute, but the air hummed with falsehoods, guards patrolling with clipboards instead of smiles, windows barred like afterthoughts. Ethan paid the driver and approached the gate, his boots thudding against the gravel path, heart pounding in rhythm with the distant hum of generators. A buzzer sounded, and a voice crackled over the intercom. "State your business." He squared his shoulders, the envelope from the plane tucked in his pocket like a talisman. "Ethan Hale, here for Lila Thompson. I'm family." The gate creaked open after a tense pause, admitting him into a lobby that smelled of bleach and bureaucracy, faded posters urging compliance, a receptionist with eyes like chipped flint. "Visiting hours are limited," she said, tapping keys with false efficiency. "And the girl. She's in processing. Court order." Ethan's jaw tightened. Sarah had warned of this, falsified papers from a judge in someone's pocket, shuffling Lila toward an Eastern program that reeked of exploitation, kids lost in the system for profit. Processing for what? She's 10. Her mother's waiting. The woman averted her gaze, murmuring about protocols, but Ethan leaned in, his voice low thunder. "I've come a long way. Let me see her." Footsteps echoed from a hallway and a man emerged, tall, suited, with a badge that screamed authority. Victor Lang, facility director, his smile as slick as oil on water. "Mr. Hale, I presume? We've heard about your involvement. Noble, but this is a legal matter. The child's welfare is our priority." Ethan's eyes narrowed, scanning the man's polished shoes. The faint bulge of a wallet stuffed with influence. "Welfare? Or a payout? I know the stories. Kids vanishing into programs while suits like you cash checks." Lang's facade cracked, a flicker of annoyance. "Watch your tone. Security." But Ethan didn't back down, the promise to Lila burning like afterburners. He pulled out his phone, hitting record. "Call her out, now, or I make this public. The vow doesn't ride quiet when honor's on the line." Tension coiled in the air, thick as the humidity pressing against the glass doors. Lang hesitated, then nodded to the receptionist who disappeared down the corridor. Minutes stretched, the clock's tick mocking Ethan's impatience, until a door swung open. Lila appeared, flanked by a nurse, her small face pale but lighting up at the sight of him. "Ethan!" She broke free, rushing into his arms, the stuffed bear from that desert night clutched tight. He knelt, inhaling the faint scent of hospital soap on her hair, relief flooding him like cool rain. "Hey, kid, told you I'd come." But her whisper chilled him. "They said I have to go away, to a place with no mummy." Lang cleared his throat. "Temporary relocation. Family services deemed it best." Ethan stood, Lila's hand in his, facing the director with eyes hardened by battles won on merit, not money. "Deemed by who? Corrupt clerks twisting arms? I flew here, faced my worst fear for her. You think that'll stop at words?" The nurse shifted uncomfortably, and in her eyes, Ethan saw an ally, a woman named Grace, badge reading her quiet dissent. "It's not right," she murmured when Lang stepped away to take a call. "Papers came through funny. I pulled strings to delay, but—" Her voice trailed, laced with the weight of her own buried promises, perhaps to a child lost long ago. As the sun crested, casting long shadows across the lobby, Ethan's phone buzzed. Marcus. With news, the crew had dug up dirt, connections to a ring siphoning kids for labor fronts, shielded by local power. "We're riding east. Hold the line." Ethan nodded to himself, the facility's walls closing in like a trap. But with Lila beside him, the fear of heights seemed trivial compared to this fight. The corruption that preyed on the vulnerable, the oaths that demanded he stand unyielding. Lang returned, face smug. "Time's up. Sign the waiver or it's trespassing." Ethan smiled faintly, a biker's edge glinting. "Not without her. This promise, it doesn't bend. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The lobby's fluorescent lights buzzed like angry hornets, casting harsh shadows that danced across Victor Lang's face as he straightened his tie, his smugness hardening into something colder. Ethan held Lila close, her small fingers digging into his vest, the fabric still carrying the faint scent of jet fuel and recycled cabin air. The director's eyes flicked to the security guard hovering by the exit, a burly man with a radio clipped to his belt. But Ethan didn't flinch. Years on the road had taught him that real power wasn't in badges or barriers. It was in the quiet stand, the unbreaking line drawn in the dust. "Waiver or not," Ethan said, his voice a low rumble echoing off the linoleum floors. "I'm walking out with her. Call your lawyers, your cops, whatever game this is, it ends today." Lang's laugh was sharp, devoid of humor, slicing through the tension like a knife through cheap fabric. "Bold words for a drifter in biker rags. You think a sob story from the desert gives you rights? The courts have spoken. Relocation for stability. Her mother's unstable, unfit. We have documents." He slid a folder across the reception desk, papers crisp and official-looking, stamped with seals that gleamed under the lights. Ethan didn't touch it. Instead, he glanced at Grace, the nurse whose earlier murmur had cracked the facade. She stood, frozen, her scrubs whispering as she shifted, eyes darting between Lila's trembling form and the hallway beyond. The air hung heavy with the sterile tang of antiseptic, undercut by the distant hum of ventilation fans, like the facility itself was breathing lies. Lila tugged at Ethan's hand, her voice a whisper hot against his side. "Don't let them take me, Ethan. They said it's for school, but the other kids cry at night. Her words hit like gravel under tires, stirring the ghosts Ethan carried. The brother who'd promised to watch his back in the sands, only to vanish in a blast of fire and regret. He knelt again, leveling his gaze with hers, the lobby's chill seeping through his jeans. "Listen, kid. Promises aren't paper, they're iron. You and me, we're riding this out." She nodded, clutching her bear tighter, its button eyes staring blankly at the unfolding storm. Grace stepped forward then, her movements deliberate, like a woman testing thin ice. "Director Lang, perhaps we can review the file. There's a discrepancy in the custody transfer, signatures that don't match." Her tone was professional, but her eyes held a spark of defiance, the kind forged in late-night shifts and unspoken regrets. Lang whirled on her, face flushing. "Mind your place, Nurse Riley. This isn't your concern." But the seed was planted. Ethan saw the flicker of doubt in the receptionist's averted gaze, the guard's hand hovering near his radio without committing. He pulled out his phone again, the screen's glow illuminating the envelope from the plane, now creased from his grip. "Discrepancy. That's polite for forgery. I've got friends digging, real ones, not desk jockeys. By noon this hits the wires. Biker saves girl from corrupt kid mill." The threat landed like a throttle twist, Lang's composure cracking further. He snatched the folder back, barking into his phone for legal backup, his voice echoing down the empty corridor. Ethan used the moment, nodding to Grace. "How long can you stall?" She leaned in, breath quick. "An hour, maybe. There's a back exit by the east wing, leads to the service road, but security cameras." Ethan followed her gaze to the blinking red lights overhead, their unblinking eyes capturing every shadow. "We'll manage. Get her things, whatever she's got left." Grace vanished into the hallway, her footsteps fading like echoes in a canyon, leaving Ethan and Lila in the charged silence. Outside, the dawn light filtered through grimy windows, painting the world in gold-streaked hues. But inside, the walls pressed closer, the air thickening with the promise of confrontation. Minutes bled into a standoff, the guard inching forward until Ethan met his stare, shoulders squared like a wall of chrome. "Easy, pal. No one's looking for trouble, just justice." The man hesitated, badge glinting, perhaps seeing his own regrets in Ethan's unyielding stance. Then chaos erupted. Alarms blared from a distant wing, sharp and insistent, red lights pulsing like a heartbeat gone wrong. Grace reappeared, breathless, a small backpack slung over her shoulder. Lila's, stuffed with a few clothes and a crumpled drawing of a motorcycle under starry skies. "Fire drill, false alarm, but it'll draw them off." "Go now!" Lang shouted from his office door, but Ethan was already moving, scooping Lila into his arms, her weight light as hope against his chest. They burst through the east door into the muggy morning, the service road crunching underfoot, lined with overflowing dumpsters that reeked of rot and neglect. Ethan's heart hammered, not from the sprint, but from the surge of adrenaline, the same rush that fueled midnight rides across endless blacktop. He set Lila down beside a rusted chain-link gap, prying it wider with calloused hands, the metal biting into his palms. "Through here, quick!" She slipped under, emerging on the other side with wide eyes, the facility's alarms fading behind the rush of traffic from the nearby highway. Grace followed, her face pale but set. "I couldn't let it happen. Lost a nephew to this system years back. Promises I couldn't keep. You're giving me a second chance." Ethan clasped her shoulder, the gesture brief but binding, like oaths swapped over beers in the compound. "Family's what we make. Thanks, Grace." They piled into a waiting service van she'd borrowed, the engine coughing to life with a belch of exhaust that smelled of freedom. As they peeled onto the highway, the city skyline loomed, towers of glass and steel piercing the haze, indifferent to the battles below. Lila leaned against him in the passenger seat, the backpack in her lap, her breathing steadying into the rhythm of escape. Ethan's phone vibrated, Marcus' voice crackling over the line. "Brother, we're an hour out. Full crew, engines hot. Dirt on Lang, tied to a network, siphoning kids for off-books labor. Feds are sniffing but slow. What's your 20? "Clear for now," Ethan replied, glancing in the rear view at Grace's determined profile. "Heading to Sarah's. But this rabbit hole goes deep. Promises like these demand we dig." The van merged into traffic, horns blaring like distant thunder, the sun climbing higher and burning away the night's doubts. Yet beneath the relief, tension coiled anew. Lang wouldn't let go easy, and the skies Ethan had conquered felt small compared to the storm brewing on solid ground. Lila's hand found his, small but fierce. "You kept your word." He squeezed back, the road stretching ahead like an open throttle, "and we'll keep fighting, for all of us." But as the miles ticked by, a shadow crossed the horizon, not clouds, but the glint of pursuit. Black sedans weaving through lanes, too purposeful for chance. The fight for redemption had only just ignited, pulling Ethan deeper into a web where loyalty was the only true weapon, and broken promises the deadliest traps. The van's tires hummed against the cracked interstate, devouring miles under a sky turning slate grey with the threat of afternoon storms. Ethan gripped the wheel, his knuckles pale against the worn plastic. The engine's growl, a poor substitute for the familiar roar of his Harley left behind in the desert dust. Lila sat wedged between him and Grace in the front, her backpack clutched like a shield, the stuffed bear peeking from its folds. The air inside was thick, with the scent of fast food wrappers from the glove compartment and the faint, acrid tang of fear sweat. Grace twisted in her seat, scanning the rearview mirror every few seconds, her nurse's scrubs rumpled and stained from the hasty escape. Those sedans, two of them, black, unmarked. Lang's muscle, no doubt. They hung back at the light, but they're closing. Ethan nodded, jaw set like forged steel, his eyes flicking to the side mirror where the pursuit glinted like predators in the haze. The highway stretched eastward, flanked by billboards faded to ghosts, promises of diners and motels that never delivered. Sarah's place was still 40 minutes out, a modest apartment in the city's frayed underbelly, but every mile felt like threading a needle in a gale. His phone buzzed on the dash, Marcus's name lighting the screen. "Talk to me," Ethan answered, voice clipped over the road noise. "Brother, we're pushing hard, engines screaming across state lines. Got a tail on our end too, county mounts sniffing the wind. That dirt we dug? Lang's not just a suit. He's got hooks in the mayor's office, funneling kids to shadow ops, factories, farms, places where little hands mean big profits. Feds are circling, but they're bought or blind. You secure?" Marcus's words crackled, laced with the wind-whipped static of a rider convoy. "Not yet," Ethan replied, accelerating as a semi-truck lumbered past, its shadow swallowing the van briefly. "Got the girl, and a new ally, nurse who flipped the script. But we're hot. Need a diversion." Lila whimpered softly, her hand finding Ethan's arm, small fingers tracing the iron vow patch on his sleeve like a talisman. He covered her hand with his free one, the warmth grounding him amid the chaos, a silent vow passing between them. No more running alone. Grace leaned forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Take the next exit. Old service road loops back through the industrial yards. I know it from supply runs. Cameras are spotty, and there's a rail yard we can lose them in." Ethan veered sharply, the van fishtailing onto the off-ramp, gravel spitting like gunfire under the tires. The sedans followed, engines snarling as they bridged the gap, their tinted windows reflecting the gathering clouds like voids. Heart pounding, Ethan pictured the facility shrinking in the distance, the lobby's cold lights, Lang's oily smirk, now just the first layer of a rot that spread like oil in water, preying on the lost for the sake of ledgers. The service road twisted into a labyrinth of rusted warehouses and chain-link lots, the air shifting to the metallic bite of industry, diesel fumes, creaking cranes, the distant clang of freight cars coupling like thunderclaps. Ethan killed the headlights, navigating by the dim glow of sodium lamps that painted everything in jaundiced hues. "Hold on," he muttered, swerving into the rail yard's shadow, the van jolting over uneven tracks embedded in the dirt. Lila buried her face in his side, muffling a gasp as they bumped to a halt behind a hulking boxcar, its graffiti-scarred side a makeshift barricade. Grace unbuckled, peering out. "Oh, they're splitting. One circling wide, the other straight-lining. We foot it from here?" Ethan cut the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the distant wail of sirens bleeding in from the highway. "Not on foot with her. Phone's got signal. Call Sarah. Get her prepped. Marcus, you hearing this?" He switched to speaker, the biker's voice booming softly. "Loud and clear. Diverting to your ping. 10 mics out. Stall if you can. We're your thunder." Ethan pocketed the phone, turning to Lila with a gentleness that belied the storm in his eyes. "Brave as ever, kid. Remember that night by the road? This is just another stretch. Close your eyes if it helps. Think of the stars we'll see when we're clear." She nodded, but her gaze held a maturity beyond her years, scarred by too many nights of uncertainty. Grace rummaged in the glove box, pulling out a spare key fob, hers, for a beater car parked nearby from an old shift. "My ride's 2 blocks over, hidden in the scrap lot. It'll blend better than this van, but if they spot us—" Her words trailed, heavy with the weight of her choice, trading her steady job, her quiet life, for this leap into the unknown. Ethan saw it. The flicker of her own buried promise, perhaps to that nephew she'd mentioned, a boy swallowed by the system's maw years ago. "You didn't have to come," he said quietly, as they slipped from the van, Lila sandwiched between them. "I did," Grace replied, her breath fogging in the cooling air. They darted from shadow to shadow. The yard's ground crunching with broken glass and cinders, the scent of creosote rising like a bitter fog. A train whistle pierced the dusk, low and mournful, masking their footsteps as they reached the chain-link fence bordering the scrap lot. Ethan boosted Lila over first, her sneakers scraping metal, then Grace, before hauling himself across, the wire snagging his jacket like claws. The sedan's headlights swept close, tires crunching gravel just beyond the rails, but the boxcar's bulk held, buying precious seconds. They piled into Grace's old sedan, a faded blue relic that started with a reluctant cough, exhaust puffing like a sigh. Ethan floored it, weaving through the maze of twisted metal hulks, the engine whining in protest. In the mirror, the pursuers faltered, one sedan bogged in a rut, the other peeling back toward the highway, perhaps radioing for reinforcements or maybe buying time for Lang's deeper web to tighten. Lila's breathing steadied, her head on Ethan's shoulder as the industrial sprawl gave way to suburban fringes, streetlights flickering to life like hesitant stars. "We're okay," he murmured, though doubt gnawed at him. This escape was a spark, not the fire. Sarah's apartment loomed ahead, a beacon in the gathering twilight, but the real battle waited there, confronting the corruption that had torn Lila's world apart, demanding not just rescue, but reckoning. As they turned onto her street, rain began to patter against the windshield, blurring the neon sign of a corner store into watery halos. Marcus's voice crackled through the phone again. "Eyes on you. Pulling up now. Cruise here, brother. Time to make some noise." Ethan exhaled, the van's escape fading into the rear view, replaced by the solid thunder of approaching bikes. But in Lila's trusting gaze, he saw the cost of every vow, the shadows that followed, the loyalties tested in the fire of truth. The storm broke fully then, sheets of rain lashing the car like judgment, washing clean the road ahead, or so he hoped. If this chapter's tension has you on the edge, smash that like button. It fuels more stories of grit and unbreakable bonds. Rain hammered the windshield like 1,000 tiny fists, turning the world outside into a smeared watercolor of sodium-lit streets and huddled shadows. Ethan eased the sedan to a curb outside Sarah's apartment building, a sagging 3-story walk-up with peeling paint and fire escapes that creaked like old bones in the wind. The engine ticked down to silence, steam rising from the hood in lazy curls that mingled with the downpour. Lila stirred beside him, her cheek pressed against his damp jacket, the rhythm of the wipers lulling her into a fragile sleep. Grace sat rigid in the passenger seat, her fingers twisting the hem of her scrubs, the fabric now clinging like a second skin from the rain they'd dodged. "This is it," she whispered, voice barely cutting through the storm's roar. "Sarah's on the second floor, blue door, end of the hall." Ethan nodded, scanning the rain-slicked alley across the street where the first glimmers of headlights pierced the veil. Marcus and the Iron Vow, rolling in like ghosts on 2 wheels. Their engines growled low, muffled by the deluge. A convoy of 10 bikes forming a protective semicircle, leathers glistening under the assault. Marcus dismounted first, his boots splashing through puddles as he approached the car, helmet tucked under one arm, rain streaming down his weathered face like tears he wouldn't shed. "Brother," he said through the cracked window, clapping Ethan's shoulder with a grip that spoke volumes. No questions, just unbreakable trust. "We cleared the highway tails. Looks like they scattered, but Lang's calling in markers. Words out on a missing ward alert. We got maybe an hour before badgers swarm." Inside, the building smelled of mildew and microwave dinners, the stairwell's fluorescent bulb flickering like a dying firefly. Ethan carried Lila up the steps, her weight a comforting anchor against the chill seeping through the walls, while Grace and Marcus flanked them, shadows merging into one defiant unit. Sarah flung open the door before they knocked, her face a mask of exhaustion and fierce relief, eyes red-rimmed, hair tangled from nights of worry, but her arms outstretched like a lifeline. "Lila! Oh, God!" She scooped her daughter from Ethan's hold, burying her face in the girl's damp curls, the reunion a quiet sob that echoed down the narrow hall. The apartment was a cramped haven, threadbare couch, stacks of unpaid bills on a coffee table scarred by coffee rings, the air heavy with the scent of chamomile tea and desperation. They gathered in the dim living room, rain lashing the single window like an impatient audience. Sarah set Lila on the couch with a blanket, the girl blinking awake, her bear propped beside her like a sentinel. "You did it," Sarah breathed, turning to Ethan, her hands trembling as she gripped his arm. "I thought, after the courts twisted everything, after my ex's family pulled strings." Her voice cracked, the story spilling out in fragments. A custody war ignited by old grudges, falsified reports painting her as unfit, all funneled through Lang's web to relocate Lila to a system that chewed up kids for profit. Grace nodded grimly, adding details from the facility's underbelly. Whispers of other children vanished into programs that masked labor mills and worse, shielded by officials who'd traded honor for envelopes of cash. Marcus paced the threadbare carpet, his boots leaving wet prints, phone in hand as he coordinated with the crew outside. "We've got eyes on the net. Anonymous tips to the clean feds. Photos of those dodgy papers Grace snagged, but it's a house of cards. One push and it topples. Ethan, you lead the call." All eyes turned to him, the room's single lamp casting long shadows that danced with the storm's fury outside. Ethan stood by the window, the glass cool against his palm, watching the bikes idle like faithful hounds. The flight's terror felt distant now, eclipsed by this groundswell of purpose. The promise to Lila expanding into a vow for all the forgotten, the chosen family weaving a net against the corruption's tide. "We don't run," he said finally, voice steady as desert stone. "We expose it. Sarah, you and Lila stay put. Grace, you're with us. Your word carries weight inside that machine." The plan coalesced like thunder gathering force. Marcus's riders would form a perimeter, drawing any heat with their presence. Lawful but unignorable, a wall of leather and loyalty that no crooked cop could breach without scrutiny. Ethan would front the confrontation, armed not with weapons but with recorded evidence. The envelope from the plane now joined by Grace's pilfered files, timestamps mismatched, signatures forged in haste. As they moved to the door, Lila reached for Ethan's hand, her small palm warm and trusting. "You'll come back?" she asked, eyes wide in the lamplight. He knelt, the floorboards groaning under him, and pressed his forehead to hers, the scent of rain and shampoo grounding the moment. "Like I promised, this family's not breaking." Outside, the storm broke with renewed vengeance. Lightning cracking the sky like a whip, illuminating the crew in stark relief, faces set, engines purring with restrained power. They mounted up, a phalanx rolling toward the city's underbelly, the mayor's annex, where Lang's strings pulled tightest. Ethan rode pillion behind Marcus, the wind tearing at his jacket, rain stinging like needles. But the fear of heights was a faded scar compared to this fire. The road twisted through flooded streets, past shuttered shops and glowing precincts, the air electric with impending clash. Grace followed in her sedan, headlights cutting the gloom, her resolve a quiet engine driving them forward. They arrived at the annex under a sky roiling like Ethan's thoughts, a squat brick building with floodlights that pierced the downpour, guards at the entrance eyeing the bikers with wary suspicion. Marcus killed the engines, the sudden hush amplifying the rain's relentless drum. Ethan dismounted, boots splashing into a puddle that reflected the lightning's flash, and strode forward, the crew fanning out behind him like wings of iron. "We're here for Director Lang," he announced to the lead guard, voice carrying over the gale. "Tell him the desert rider's calling in his debts. Promises don't fly away." The guard radioed inside, tension coiling as minutes stretched, the storm mirroring the turmoil within. Lang emerged then, flanked by suits and uniforms, his face a thundercloud of indignation under the portico's shelter. "Hail! You think this circus scares me? Trespassing, kidnapping, that girl's under protection." But Ethan stepped closer, water streaming from his brow, holding up his phone with the recordings playing, Lila's whispers, Grace's testimony, the facility's alarms fading into evidence of deceit. Protection or profit? We've got the threads, your network, the mayor's cut. Feds are listening now, one word from us and it unravels. Lang's eyes darted, the rain masking any sweat on his brow, but the bluff cracked under the crew's unyielding stares. Veterans, riders, a nurse who'd chosen truth over tenure. Grace stepped up, folder in hand, her voice cutting clear. "I worked there, saw the lies. This ends tonight." A murmur rippled through the guards, one shifting uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing the rot in his own ranks. Lightning forked overhead, thunder rumbling like applause, as Lang's phone buzzed, urgent, no doubt the feds closing in on the tips. He backed away, bluster deflating. "This isn't over." But it was. In that moment, the promise fulfilled not by fists, but by the light of exposure. Loyalty, standing tall against the flood. Ethan turned back to the crew, rain washing clean the night's grime, Lila's face flashing in his mind as a beacon. Yet, as sirens wailed in the distance, not pursuit, but reinforcements for justice, he felt the web's deeper strands tugging, loose ends that demanded one final ride, one last stand for the innocent still caught in the shadows. The storm raged on, but the chosen family's bond burned brighter, pulling them toward dawn's hard-won light. The thunder rolled away into the distance, leaving a hush broken only by the patter of lingering rain on the annex's concrete steps. Ethan stood drenched under the floodlights, his leather jacket heavy with water, clinging like a second skin as the crew formed a silent ring around him. Lang had retreated into the building's maw, his parting glare swallowed by the closing doors, but the air hummed with the aftermath. Sirens swelling closer, not as hunters, but as harbingers of unraveling secrets. Marcus clapped Ethan's back, his grin fierce through the wet strands of hair plastered to his forehead. "You stared down the snake, brother. That's how we ride." Grace clutched the folder to her chest, rain blurring the ink on its edges, her eyes shining with a mix of exhaustion and triumph, the quiet victory of a promise reclaimed. Federal agents spilled from unmarked cars moments later, badges flashing like lightning's echo, their voices cutting through the downpour with clipped authority. "Mr. Hale, Nurse Riley, we've been tracking this for months. Anonymous tips lit the fuse." The lead agent, a woman with a no-nonsense braid and eyes sharpened by too many shadowed cases, took the folder from Grace without a word, flipping through pages that detailed the web. Falsified custody orders, siphoned funds routing to offshore accounts, children funneled into hidden operations masked as rehabilitation. Lang's name starred at the center, threads linking to the mayor's office, a rot that had festered unchecked until this night. Ethan watched as agents swarmed the annex, the building's lights flickering like a cornered animal's last gasp. No shots fired, no chains rattling, just the steady march of truth, pulling the veil from corruption's face. Back at Sarah's apartment, the storm had eased to a drizzle, the air inside thick with the aroma of hot cocoa steaming on the stove, a small ritual Sarah insisted on, her hands steady now as she stirred mugs with a mother's resolve. Lila perched on the couch, wrapped in a dry blanket, her bear propped against a pillow, eyes wide, but no longer shadowed by fear. The crew filtered in, dripping trails across the threshold, their presence filling the cramped space with the scent of wet leather and engine oil, a comforting reminder of roads traveled together. Marcus hung his helmet by the door, exchanging nods with Sarah, while Grace knelt beside Lila, smoothing her hair with a tenderness born of her own scars. "You were so brave," she whispered, and the girl beamed, the weight of the facility lifting like mist in sunlight. Ethan lingered by the window, the city lights smudging through the rain-streaked glass, his reflection a ghost, etched with lines softened by the night's forge. The flight replayed in fragments, the terror of ascent, the pilot's words bridging his brother's legacy to this moment, tears that had washed away isolation. He'd feared the skies for their vast indifference, the loss of ground beneath him, but up there, suspended, he'd found a new horizon, promises that soared beyond chrome and asphalt. Sarah approached, handing him a mug, steam curling like desert smoke. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, voice thick. "They had her papers ready, said I'd lose her forever. But you flew. For her." He took the mug, the warmth seeping into his palms, and met her gaze. "Family's not given, it's chosen. Lila's got us all now, iron vow included." Lila tugged at his sleeve, pulling him down to sit beside her, the couch sagging under their weight. "Tell me about the plane," she said, curiosity sparking in her eyes like stars breaking through clouds. Ethan chuckled, the sound low and genuine, settling her against his side. "It was loud, kid, engines rumbling like 100 Harleys taking off, but up high you see everything. Rivers like silver threads, cities like fireflies. Scary at first, but it showed me the world's bigger than fears." She nestled closer, the blanket's edge brushing his arm, and in that quiet, the room filled with stories. Marcus recounting desert rides, Grace sharing tales of mended lives in the ER, Sarah weaving in fragments of Lila's laughter before the storm. The crew listened, bonds tightening like well-oiled chains, a chosen family forged in the crucible of loyalty. Hours later, As dawn crept in, with pale fingers through the blinds, the agents returned with confirmation. Lang in cuffs, the mayor's office under raid, the network's threads snapping one by one. Children like Lila, lost in the shuffle of bureaucracy, would be traced, reunited, the system's wounds laid bare for healing. Grace's testimony sealed it, her voice steady over the phone lines, earning her not just justice, but a nod from the feds, a role in oversight, turning her regrets into reform. Ethan stepped outside for air. The pavement slick and shining, the cruise bikes lined up like sentinels under the clearing sky. Marcus joined him, lighting a cigarette that glowed orange against the grey. "You conquered the air, brother. What's next? Wings on your Harley?" Ethan shook his head, a faint smile cracking the weariness. "Ground's home, but promises, they take you anywhere." The sun broke fully then, gilding the rooftops in gold, the rain's gift washing the streets clean. Lila ran out, barefoot and beaming, hugging Ethan's legs before dashing back inside with a giggle. In her wake, he felt the scars lighten, not erased, but honored. His brother's vow echoed in every stand he'd taken, the fear of falling transformed into the strength to rise. The iron vow revved to life, engines purring farewell, but Ethan knew this ride circled back, not to isolation, but to a web of kin stretching east and west. Sarah waved from the door, Lila beside her, their silhouettes a promise kept, unbreakable as dawn. As the convoy pulled away, Ethan rode pillion once more, the wind drying his jacket, carrying the scent of wet earth and fresh starts. The road unfurled ahead, endless and true, a testament to honor's quiet roar. In the end, redemption wasn't a destination. It was the journey, fueled by oaths that outlasted storms, binding the broken into something whole. Thank you for riding this journey with us. If stories of unbreakable promises and chosen family touch your heart, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got more tales of grit and grace coming your way.